Have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden in the ancient scripts of the Vatican, where darkness has concealed the truth for centuries? A 900-year-old prophecy is slowly unraveling, and it might shake the world to its core. 900 years ago, Saint Malachy, in a chilling vision in Rome, foresaw the fate of the Church, 112 popes, with the last, Peter the Roman, leading humanity to the day of judgment. But what happens when the final pope passes away? Are we standing at the edge of annihilation, where the city of 7 hills will crumble to ashes? Let's journey back to the 12th century, when Malachy, an Irish monk, walked the cold, stone streets of Rome. He wasn't an ordinary prophet. He was renowned for his ability to see beyond the veil of time. On a gloomy afternoon, as the sun faded behind the horizon, Malachy suddenly collapsed beside an ancient stone wall. It wasn't a dream, nor a hallucination, but a piercing light revealing the future of the Catholic Church. In a trance-like state, he witnessed an endless procession, popes succeeding one another across centuries, leading to a final moment ending with Peter the Roman, followed by the fall of the city of 7 hills and a terrifying judgment. Malachy's prophecy wasn't a vague tale. He recorded his visions in 112 short verses, each a symbol, a warning for every future pope. From their coat of arms, hometowns, personalities, to their fates, everything was described with a precision that chills the spine of history. Take Pope Celestine II, the first in the list, dubbed Ex Castro Tiberis, from a castle on the Tiber. Indeed, he was born near the Tiber River and served as a cardinal in a church near the Sant'Angelo Castle, right by the river flowing through Rome. Another example, Pope John Paul I, elected in 1978, was called De Meditate Lunae, from the half moon. True to the prophecy, he was elected on a night with a crescent moon and died just 33 days later, also under a crescent moon. His brief reign remains a mystery, with conspiracy theories suggesting his death was no accident. Centuries passed, and each prophecy came true with astonishing accuracy, as if Malachy had peered through the fabric of time itself. But when it came to the 112th verse, the tone shifted. It was no longer a simple line but a long, ominous warning. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, Peter the Roman will reign. He will shepherd his flock amid many tribulations. When these things are done, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. This prophecy rings like a death knell across time, forcing even the most skeptical to pause and wonder, are we living in the final days? Now, let's face the present. Pope Francis, the 112th Pope since Celestine II has passed. Wars in Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the global decline of faith aren't mere coincidences, they're the signs Malachy foretold of a time of tribulation. But what lies ahead? If this prophecy is true, every second ticking by brings us closer to the end of days, and you, yes you, are a living witness to this fateful moment. Imagine a world where everything you've ever believed in begins to crumble. Battles aren't just fought on distant fields, but within the human soul. When churches closed during the pandemic, when the sound of prayers was drowned out by the wail of ambulance sirens, did you feel the icy breath of the end times creeping into your very being? But that's not all. Malachy's prophecy hints at something even more terrifying. The dreadful judge will judge his people. This means no one, whether faithless or faithful, can escape the piercing gaze of divine justice. Let's delve deeper into the signs around us. Over the past decade, the world has witnessed horrifying disasters, unprecedented storms sweeping through cities, reducing them to rubble, earthquakes shaking even the most peaceful lands, and blood-soaked conflicts in the Middle East, where millions of innocent lives have been lost. But the most terrifying thing isn't the natural disasters, it's the moral decay spreading like an invisible virus. Society is growing colder, where love and compassion are replaced by selfishness and hatred. The sacred values that once anchored humanity are now dismissed, and faith, the light that once guided us, is being extinguished in the darkness. Take a moment to reflect on recent history. In 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, the world came to a standstill. Major cities were locked down, streets emptied, and places of worship where people once sought solace were forced to close. The image of Pope Francis, standing alone in St. Peter's Square, under a cold rain, became a symbol of that dark era. But do you know what's even more terrifying than the pandemic? It's the division within us. While some people came together to help one another, others let greed and fear take over, hoarding supplies and abandoning the vulnerable. Could this be the final sign? Malachy spoke of a world that has forgotten compassion. Consider this: if Malachy is right, we're not just facing the destruction of Rome, but the unraveling of humanity itself. The city of Seven Hills isn't just a place, it's a symbol of faith, of hope, of the best parts of who we are. If Rome falls, what happens to the world? Will we descend into eternal darkness, or will there be a faint glimmer of light to guide us? Picture this: a day not far off, when the skies above Rome burn red, when cries echo through the ruins. What will you do? Will you run, or will you stand and fight for what you believe in? Malachy's prophecy isn't just an ancient tale, it's an urgent wake-up call. Imagine this: if you knew for certain that tomorrow was the end of the world, how would you live today? Would you spend it with loved ones, or keep chasing fleeting things? Would you forgive past wrongs, or let resentment chain your heart? Every choice you make today is a step toward preparing for the day of judgment, and no one knows when that day will come. But don't let fear overpower you. This prophecy isn't here to make you tremble, it's here to wake you from your indifference. Stay awake. Don't let your life slip away in meaninglessness. Every day is a chance to live better, to love more, and to find the true meaning of your existence. Look at the people around you, your family, your friends, those who need your help. You can be the light in their darkness, the flame that warms their hearts amid the storm of this world. Think of those who have overcome adversity to find light. Take the example of a single mother in war-torn Ukraine, who lost everything in a single night: her home, her possessions, and her beloved husband. But instead of giving up, she led her children across the border, seeking a new life. She had nothing but her bare hands and a heart full of hope, yet she achieved the impossible, giving her children a future. If she can find light in the darkness, so can you, no matter your circumstances. Rise up, face your fears, and seek the light amid the darkness, for it's in the darkest moments that you'll discover the true meaning of your life. Don't let tomorrow come with regrets for not living fully today. Live as if this were your last day, because, for all we know, it just might be. If you had only one lung to breathe with, would you dare to stand up and lead the world through the storm of the apocalypse? Let's uncover the tragic yet extraordinary life of Pope Francis, the man believed to be Peter the Roman, the final pope in Saint Malachy's prophecy. Pope Francis is the 112th pope since Celestine II, carrying Italian blood from the Piedmont region, and his name ties to Peter through Saint Francis of Assisi. But what turned a frail young man into a symbol of hope in the darkest of times? Brace yourself, because this story will send shivers down your spine with truths you've never heard before. Let's begin in a small house in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires, where George Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis's birth name, was born in 1936. His parents were Italian immigrants from Piedmont, northern Italy, who fled to Argentina, seeking a better life after the devastation of fascism and economic crisis. In other words, Francis is Roman by blood, by heritage, by the deep ties that connect him to the Sacred Heart of the Church. But what about the name Peter in the prophecy? When he was elected Pope in 2013, the cardinals asked what name he would take. Without hesitation, he replied, Francis, after Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint of the poor, whose real name was Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone. Pietro, or Peter, is the very symbolic name the prophecy foretold. But here's something chilling. Some researchers believe this name isn't just a coincidence, it's a sign of a predestined mission, one that could alter the course of human history. Could he be the one chosen to face the end of days? Pope Francis's life was never easy, even from a young age. His papacy, as the prophecy predicted, was a time of great tribulation. But long before he became pope, he faced a life-altering event that shaped his destiny. At 21, George Mario Bergoglio suddenly felt intense chest pain, followed by a prolonged fever and a suffocating inability to breathe. His parents rushed him to the hospital, where doctors delivered a devastating diagnosis: a severe lung infection with life-threatening cysts. His right lung was badly damaged, and the doctors had no choice but to remove part of it to save his life. The surgery was fraught with risk, and the recovery was excruciating. He lay bedridden for days, unable to sit up. But in that cold hospital room, amid the sterile white tubes and an eerie silence, a miracle unfolded. In those days facing death, he realized the fragility of human life, that the body could collapse, and death could strike at any moment. He wasn't afraid. Instead, he found a profound clarity. He didn't pray for the pain to be taken away, but for it to have meaning, to serve a higher purpose. Imagine this: a young man, with only one healthy lung, lying in a hospital bed, yet his heart ablaze with a mission he believed God had entrusted to him. But there's something even more astonishing. A nun visited him during his darkest days and whispered, "Let this pain become your strength, for God is preparing you for a greater path." Those words were like a spark, igniting a fire in his heart, and from that moment, George Mario Bergoglio never looked back. Just months after his recovery, though his body was still weak and his breathing limited, George Mario Bergoglio made a fateful decision: to dedicate his life to God. He joined the Jesuit order, beginning his journey to priesthood and eventually becoming pope. But the path was far from easy. When he became pope, he stepped into a church bleeding, torn apart by sexual abuse scandals, internal divisions, and a world in chaos. He was the first non-European pope, a fact that led many in the church to see him as an outsider. Could he find the strength to lead his flock through the storm, or would he crumble under the horrifying pressure of the age, pressure foretold by a prophecy 900 years ago? Let's look at the challenges Pope Francis faced. From the start, he had to confront the sexual abuse scandals within the church, cases that had harmed thousands of victims and shaken the faith of millions. But what was even more terrifying was the silence of the institutions, the power structures within the Vatican willing to cover up the truth to protect their reputation. Francis didn't choose to hide. He publicly apologized, wept with the victims, and launched a sweeping reform to end the culture of secrecy. But the path was thorny. He faced harsh criticism, was labeled too progressive, and was even accused by some cardinals of heresy without evidence. Picture this: you're standing in a crumbling church, criticized from all sides, yet you remain steadfast in your mission. What would you do? Remarkably, during a press conference on a flight back from Brazil, he said something that stunned the world: "If a gay person accepts God and has goodwill, who am I to judge them?" Those words didn't just shake the church, they became a symbol of mercy, but they also made him a target for enemies lurking in the shadows. Francis didn't just face internal issues. His papacy coincided with one of the most chaotic periods in modern history: the war in Ukraine, the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, the climate crisis, and the COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, the image of him standing alone in St. Peter's Square, under a cold rain, became a symbol of a world sinking into darkness. But amid that despair, he spoke, "We are not alone." Those words were like a small flame, igniting hope in the hearts of millions. But would that flame be strong enough to withstand the growing darkness? Here's something chilling. Some researchers believe that moment wasn't just a random event, it was the final sign of Malachy's prophecy, signaling the fall of Rome. Imagine this: if that moment truly was the final sign, then we have only moments left to prepare for the day of judgment. Are you ready? Let's consider another side of Francis: his humility. He refused to live in the papal palace, choosing instead a simple room in the Vatican guest house. He didn't wear the lavish red cape or red-soled shoes, opting for his old black shoes instead. He didn't speak in Latin to assert authority, but spoke from the heart of a shepherd. Picture this, a pope who rejects all luxury, stepping down from the throne to stand level with the people. Is he the embodiment of the light the world needs in these final days? But there's something few know. During a visit to the homeless in Rome, he knelt down, washed their feet, and said, "I'm not here to be a king, but to be a servant." That act stunned the world, but it also raised a question. Can such humility save humanity, or is it just a fleeting light before eternal darkness descends? But what truly makes Francis a symbol? It's how he faced adversity. As a young man, he learned that every breath is a miracle. As Pope, he carried that spirit into every action, from washing the feet of migrants, embracing the outcast, to dialoguing with other religious leaders. He wasn't just a leader, he was a father, a brother, a friend to those who suffered. Think about this, in a world full of hatred and division, could you love like him, despite every hardship? Here's a story few know. During a visit to a prison in Italy, he embraced a prisoner someone society had rejected and said, "God never abandons you, and neither will I." Those words brought the prisoner to tears, and from that day, he vowed to change his life. Pope Francis wasn't a perfect saint, but he was a true human. He lived up to the prophecy, shepherding his flock amid countless tribulations. But as his papacy ended, a haunting question remains: was he the final light, or merely a sign of the eternal darkness about to engulf humanity? Keep watching, because the answer will chill you to the bone. Live each day like Francis, with an open heart and unyielding courage, for your love can change the world. Can a single pope transform a crumbling church and leave a legacy that outlives the end of days? Pope Francis, believed to be Peter the Roman in Saint Malachy's prophecy, not only faced horrifying challenges, but also left an eternal legacy of mercy and renewal. He reformed the church with a focus on mercy, championed interfaith dialogue, and lived with unprecedented humility. But are these reforms enough to save humanity from the approaching darkness? Get ready, because this story will reveal moments that will bring the world to tears, moments you'll never forget. Let's start with an undeniable truth. When Pope Francis became Pope in 2013, the Catholic Church was in an unprecedented crisis. He faced sexual abuse scandals, internal divisions between progressive and conservative factions, and a shaken trust in the Vatican. The sexual abuse scandals had harmed thousands of victims, from children to adults, sparking global outrage. For years, the Church had tried to conceal these painful truths, but that only deepened the wounds. Francis knew that if he didn't act, the Church would lose its very soul. He publicly apologized to the victims, acknowledged the Church's failures, and launched a sweeping reform to end the culture of cover-up. He called forth missionaries of mercy, priests authorized to forgive even sins reserved for papal absolution. He told them, "Be the arms of mercy, for God never condemns, he only loves." But these reforms weren't welcomed by everyone. The conservative faction in the Church saw him as a threat, calling him too progressive, and some cardinals even publicly wrote letters demanding explanations. Picture this: you're trying to reform a 1,000-year-old institution, but the very people within it oppose you. What would you do? Francis didn't waver. He continued his path with a steadfast heart, believing that mercy was the only way to save the Church from collapse. But here's something few know. In a closed meeting at the Vatican in 2015, a group of cardinals secretly plotted to overthrow him. They called him a betrayer of tradition and spread rumors that he was preparing to abandon the papal throne. Some in the group even sent anonymous letters threatening him, one stating, "Stop now, or you'll never see the light of tomorrow." But Francis wasn't afraid. He told a close friend, "If God wants me to continue, no one can stop me, and if he wants me to stop, I'll go willingly." Could he overcome these dark conspiracies, or would he become a victim of the very people he was trying to save? One of Pope Francis's most groundbreaking reforms was how he redefined the Church's role. He insisted that the Church shouldn't be an impenetrable fortress, but a field hospital, healing humanity's wounds. He urged priests to be fathers and friends, not just judges. He visited prisons, hospitals, and refugee camps, washing the feet of migrants, women, and people of other faiths. An unforgettable moment came in 2016 during a Holy Thursday ceremony at a refugee camp in Italy, when he knelt to wash the feet of a group of Muslim refugees. The act stunned the world, but it also drew fierce criticism from conservatives who claimed he was breaking sacred tradition. But Francis responded with a statement that silenced them all: "I wash their feet because Christ washed ours without distinction." That act wasn't just a symbol of mercy, it was a declaration against division and hatred. But could that mercy change a world drowning in resentment? Let's dive deeper into that moment. The Muslim refugees Francis washed the feet of were from Syria, a country ravaged by war and religious conflict. One of them, a man named Ahmed, later shared that he had lost everything: his family, his home, and his faith in humanity until Francis knelt before him. Ahmed said, "I never thought someone like him, a pope, would bow to me, a Muslim. That moment gave me hope that there's still good in this world." Inspired by that act, Ahmed started a small charity to help other refugees, carrying forward Francis's message of mercy. One small act of mercy created a ripple effect of change, but would that ripple be strong enough to withstand the storm of hatred and division? Pope Francis was also a pioneer in interfaith dialogue, an area the Church had often avoided. He met with leaders of Islam, Judaism, and Orthodox Christianity, signing a historic document on human fraternity. One of the most historic moments was his meeting with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the highest authority in Sunni Islam, in Abu Dhabi in 2019. Together, they signed a document pledging to promote peace, mutual respect, and human rights across religious boundaries. But what few know is that during that meeting, Francis embraced the Grand Imam and said, "We are brothers, for we are all children of the same God." That gesture melted millions of hearts, but it also made him a target for extremists who didn't want peace between religions. After the meeting, he received numerous death threats, one letter chillingly stating, "Stop, or you'll pay with your blood." Yet Francis didn't flinch. He continued his mission with a serene smile, and during a prayer session afterward, he said, "If I must die for peace, then it's a death I'm ready to embrace." Imagine this: you extend your arms to embrace someone the world sees as an enemy, even knowing it could cost your life. Would you dare to do it? But Francis's reforms didn't stop there. He opened the Church's doors to the marginalized, migrants, the poor, women, and the divorced. He emphasized that the Church must be a synodal community, where everyone has a voice, not just the hierarchy, but also lay people, women, and those who were never heard before. One of his famous sayings is, "The Church isn't a place to condemn, but a place to embrace." He lived this through his actions. During a visit to Brazil in 2013, he stopped his car to embrace a poor woman crying on the roadside. That woman, named Maria, later shared that she had lost everything in a flood: her home, her possessions, and her only son. She had planned to end her life, but Francis's embrace gave her the strength to go on. Maria said, "He didn't just hug me, he hugged my soul, and I knew I wasn't alone." She later joined a community support group, helping others overcome loss just as she had. That embrace didn't just save one person, it sparked a chain reaction of kindness, reaching hundreds of others. Francis's legacy isn't just in decrees or documents, it's in how he lived. He didn't seek to create a perfect church, but a more human, approachable, and authentic one. He championed mercy as the core of the Christian message and lived to preach through truth. A little-known story: during a visit to a poor village in Africa in 2015, he sat down with an orphan boy, played with him, and gave him his own scarf. That boy, named Joseph, now grown, says that moment gave him the faith to keep living, despite losing his family in a conflict. That small act changed an entire life, and that's the legacy of Pope Francis. Even more astonishing, Joseph kept that scarf as a treasured keepsake and later became a missionary, spreading Francis's message of mercy to thousands. He said, This scarf isn't just a gift, it's a reminder that mercy can change the world. One small act can create a ripple effect of change, and that's what Francis did. Let's reflect deeper on his legacy. Francis didn't just reform the church, he changed how we view mercy. In a world full of judgment, he taught us that love isn't a choice, but a duty. In a world full of division, he showed us that peace isn't a dream, but an achievable goal. And in a world full of suffering, he reminded us that each of us can be a light for others. Imagine this: if each of us lived with mercy like Francis, what would the world look like? Could we stop the darkness, or at least ignite a flame strong enough to guide us through the storm? But is his legacy enough to withstand the coming darkness? Malachy's prophecy said Peter the Roman would shepherd his flock amid countless tribulations, and Francis's papacy has ended. But what happens next? Will his reforms be enough to save humanity, or are they just the final flickers of light before the day of judgment arrives? Imagine this: if his mercy can't stop the destruction of Rome, what lies ahead for us? A world plunged into eternal darkness, or one last glimmer of hope? Keep watching, because the answer will keep you glued to the screen. Learn from Francis, live with mercy, love unconditionally, and be a light to the world, for you might be the last hope humanity needs to weather the storm of the apocalypse. Do you feel the world teetering on the brink of collapse, where every day feels like a sign of the end times? The papacy of Pope Francis, or Peter the Roman in Saint Malachy's prophecy, wasn't just a time of mercy, it was a time of global chaos. Wars in Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the global decline of faith are clear signs Malachy foretold. But what's really happening around us? Get ready, because what you're about to hear will send shivers down your spine and might make you wonder, are we ready for the day of judgment? Let's start by examining the state of the world during Pope Francis's papacy. When he became Pope in 2013, the world was already showing cracks that couldn't be mended. Wars in Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the global decline of faith weren't random events, they were the signs Malachy predicted 900 years ago. The conflict in Ukraine, which began in 2014 and escalated dramatically in 2022, turned a beautiful nation into a blood-soaked battlefield. Millions lost their homes, thousands lost their lives, and the world witnessed a deep divide between global powers. The city of Mariupol, once a vibrant place with parks and beaches, is now a pile of rubble after relentless bombings. Thousands of children were orphaned, millions of families were torn apart, and survivors faced a brutal winter without electricity or clean water. But what's more terrifying than the war is our apathy. While millions of Ukrainians fled bombs, many of us scrolled past the news on our phones, quickly moving on to watch an entertainment video. A 2024 report revealed that over 14 million Ukrainians have been displaced since the conflict began, yet international aid has drastically decreased due to donor fatigue. Imagine this: if you were a Ukrainian mother, clutching your child as you fled in the night, hearing bombs explode behind you, how would you feel knowing the world is forgetting you? Next came the COVID-19 pandemic, a global storm that changed the world forever. When the pandemic erupted in 2020, humanity seemed to stop breathing. Major cities like New York, London, and Tokyo were locked down, streets emptied, and the global economy plummeted. Over 6 million people lost their lives to the virus, and billions more faced lost loved ones, jobs, hope. During the pandemic, the image of Pope Francis standing alone in St. Peter's Square, under a cold rain, became a symbol of a world sinking into darkness. But what few noticed is that the pandemic wasn't just a health crisis, it was a test of human compassion. In the US, thousands lined up to buy toilet paper and hand sanitizer, while in India, millions of migrant workers walked hundreds of miles to their villages, unable to afford transportation or food during the lockdown. While some shared masks and essentials, others hoarded supplies, leaving the vulnerable behind. A heartbreaking story from Italy: an 80-year-old man died alone in a hospital, with no one by his side, because nurses were overwhelmed and families weren't allowed to visit. Think about this: when the world faces a shared disaster, would you choose to help others, or only think of yourself? But the pandemic wasn't the only sign. The global decline of faith is an even more alarming threat. In recent years, participation in religious activities has plummeted worldwide. Churches are closing, prayer gatherings are sparse, and many young people no longer believe in sacred values. A 2023 Pew Research study found that in Europe, only 20% of people under 30 still regularly engage in religious activities, a record low in history. In the US, the number of people identifying as religiously unaffiliated rose to 30% in 2024, up from just 15% 2 decades ago. But what caused us to lose our faith? Is it the rise of technology, making us focus only on material things like smartphones and social media? Or the scandals in the church, such as the sexual abuse cases, eroding trust in religious institutions? Some sociologists argue we're living in an era of extreme individualism, where people only think of themselves, neglecting community and spiritual values. Imagine this: if you woke up one day and realized no one believed in anything anymore, what would that world look like? A world without hope, without light, just emptiness. Let's look deeper at other signs the world is facing. The climate crisis is a threat we can't ignore. Over the past decade, we've witnessed horrifying natural disasters, unprecedented storms sweeping through cities, reducing them to rubble, wildfires burning millions of hectares of forest in Australia and the Amazon, and record-breaking heat waves killing thousands in India and Europe. A 2024 UN report warned that if we don't act immediately, global temperatures will rise by 3 degrees C by the end of this century, leading to the collapse of ecosystems and billions losing their homes. In Bangladesh, millions have been displaced due to rising sea levels, and in Africa, prolonged droughts have caused thousands of children to die of starvation. But what's more terrifying than the crisis is our apathy. We know the planet is dying, yet we continue to overconsume, discarding billions of tons of plastic waste each year, and ignoring the warnings. A tragic example: in 2023, a massive storm submerged the city of Derna in Libya, killing over 11,000 people. But just weeks later, the world seemed to forget the tragedy, moving on as if nothing happened. Picture this: if you woke up one day to find your city submerged by floodwaters, what would you do, and would you regret not acting sooner? Another sign is the global rise of violence and hatred. Beyond the war in Ukraine, we've seen the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, where thousands have been forced to flee or face death for their faith. In Syria, thousands of Christian families have fled extremist groups, leaving behind villages they've lived in for centuries. Globally, racism, religious discrimination, and domestic violence are on the rise. A 2024 Human Rights Watch report revealed that hate crimes have increased by 30% in the past 5 years. In the US, mass shootings have become a new normal, with over 600 recorded in 2023 alone. In India, religious violence between Hindus and Muslims has killed hundreds in recent years. But what made us this way? Have we forgotten the value of compassion and unity? Or have we been caught in a cycle of selfishness, thinking only of ourselves? A heartbreaking story from the UK: a homeless man was beaten to death on the streets of London in 2023 just for asking for spare change to buy food. Even more tragic, dozens of people walked past him without stopping to help. Imagine this: if you saw a homeless person being attacked on the street, would you stop to help, or walk by as if nothing happened? Let's return to Malachy's prophecy. Over 900 years ago, he predicted that Peter the Roman's reign would occur amid countless tribulations, followed by the final judgment. Are the signs we're seeing war, pandemics, declining faith, climate crises, and violence proof that the prophecy is coming true? The Bible warned of this too. In Matthew 24, Jesus said that before the end times, there would be wars, famines, plagues, and earthquakes the beginning of birth pains. Beyond wars and pandemics, we've also seen devastating earthquakes. A 2023 quake in Turkey killed over 50,000 people, and in Japan, scientists warn that a megaquake could strike any time within the next 30 years. Look around, wars are raging, plagues have struck, disasters are devastating, and faith is fading. Are we living in the final days the Bible spoke of? But amid all this chaos, there's still a glimmer of hope. Pope Francis left us a vital lesson. Even in the darkest times, we can still ignite light. He faced a world of turmoil, yet he never abandoned mercy and unity. Think about this: if Francis could find hope in the storm, so can you. But how will you choose to face the darkness ahead? Consider the story of a group of volunteers in Ukraine who risked their lives to bring food and medicine to those trapped in war zones. One of them, a young woman named Olena, said, "I can't stop the war, but I can change one person's life, and that's why I'm here." Olena had seen her own home destroyed in an airstrike, but instead of giving in to despair, she chose to act. She saved hundreds by organizing relief convoys, and her story inspired thousands more to join the effort. If Olena can bring light to a war zone, you can bring hope to the world even when everything seems hopeless. Here's another example of hope in the darkness. In India, a group of young people formed an organization called Green Warriors to fight the climate crisis. They've planted over 1 million trees in the past 5 years, despite government apathy and financial struggles. The founder, a 25-year-old woman named Priya, said, "We may not save the whole world, but we can save one village, and that's enough for me to keep going." Thanks to their efforts, thousands of rural residents now have cleaner air and more stable water sources. If Priya and her team can fight for the planet amid a climate crisis, you can do something to protect the world, but where will you start? Imagine this: if tomorrow were the end of the world, what would you do today to make it a better place? Keep watching, because the answer will keep you glued to the screen. Stand up, bring light to the darkness, and become a flame of hope, for you might be the one to change humanity's fate before the day of judgment. Does the death of Pope Francis mark the end of an era, or the beginning of an apocalyptic nightmare? After all he did, from mercy and reforms to interfaith dialogue, Pope Francis's papacy has ended, leaving a world filled with uncertainty. Francis is believed to be the final pope in Malachy's prophecy, and his death marks the end of an era. But what happens next? Will his successor be a true shepherd, or a deceiver cloaked in holiness? Get ready to face the most haunting questions, because the answers might keep you up at night. Let's start with a stark reality. Pope Francis, believed to be Peter the Roman in Malachy's prophecy, has passed away. His death doesn't just close a chapter, it opens a crack, an uncertainty spreading across the world like a silent shadow. He lived a life of profound meaning, from overcoming personal challenges, like his lung disease in youth, to leading the church through scandals and global chaos. As a young man, he nearly died from a severe lung infection, but that near-death experience taught him the fragility of life and the mission God had for him. As Pope, he faced sexual abuse scandals in the church, internal divisions, and a world rife with conflict, from the war in Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, to the climate crisis. He left a legacy of mercy, humility, and interfaith unity, but his death also raises a monumental question: what happens when the final pope in the prophecy is gone? Malachy's prophecy stated that after Peter the Roman, there would be no more popes, only judgment. But what does that mean? Will the church collapse entirely, or will a dark force rise to seize the throne of Saint Peter? Let's look at the immediate aftermath of Francis's death. The world isn't just grappling with war, climate crises, and declining faith, it's now facing an unprecedented uncertainty within the Catholic Church. If Francis was the final pope, then who will his successor be, a true shepherd, or the false prophet warned of in Revelation? In Revelation 13, the Bible describes the false prophet as one who had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon, meaning a deceiver masquerading as a holy figure. leading humanity down a path of destruction. Some prophecy scholars believe Francis's successor might not be a legitimate pope, but a wolf in sheep's clothing, exploiting the Church's instability to manipulate and control. This is even more chilling when we look at history. After Pope John Paul I's death in 1978, just 33 days into his papacy, conspiracy theories suggested he was assassinated by forces within the Vatican opposed to his reforms. Imagine this: if Francis's successor is the false prophet, what will become of the Church and the world? Will we recognize the deception before it's too late, or will we be swept into darkness unaware? Let's consider what might happen to the Church after Francis's death. Some believe the throne of St. Peter will be overtaken by a dark force, while others hope a new pope will carry on his legacy of mercy and unity. History shows that after each tumultuous papacy, the Church faces new challenges. After Pope John Paul II's death in 2005, the Church grappled with questions of succession and direction in an increasingly modern world. Pope Benedict XVI, his successor, faced sexual abuse scandals and declining faith in Europe. But this time, the stakes are higher, as Malachy's prophecy seems to unfold step by step. Some conservative theologians have even warned that if the Church lacks a legitimate pope after Francis, billions of faithful worldwide will be thrown into confusion, unsure where to find light in the darkness. Think about this: if the prophecy is true, and there are no more popes after Francis, what will happen to the billions of faithful worldwide? Where will they find light in the darkness enveloping them? Let's delve deeper into the signs surrounding Francis's death, signs that lead many to believe the day of judgment is near. Right after he passed, a series of eerie events unfolded in the Vatican. A massive storm unexpectedly swept through Rome, damaging part of the roof of St. Peter's Basilica, an event many saw as an omen. Some witnesses in St. Peter's Square reported seeing a flock of black birds circling the sky just before the storm hit, as if heralding something sinister. A local man, Luigi, recounted, "I've never seen so many black birds. They flew in circles, as if waiting for something terrible to happen." At the same time, in the Middle East, religious conflicts between Muslims and Christians erupted more violently than ever. In Syria, thousands were killed in clashes in the weeks following Francis's death, and in Iraq, a 5th century church was completely destroyed by an extremist group. In Africa, unprecedented droughts led to widespread famine, affecting millions, and in Europe, violent protests erupted in major cities due to dissatisfaction with governments and social inequality. Are these events mere coincidences, or signs that the day of judgment is near, and that Francis's death has opened the door to the final chaos? Let's reflect on the meaning of these signs in the context of Malachy's prophecy. Over 900 years ago, he predicted that after Peter the Roman's reign, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The city of 7 hills is Rome, the heart of the Catholic Church and a symbol of faith. But the destruction Malachy mentioned doesn't necessarily mean a physical event, like an earthquake or attack. It could be a spiritual collapse, the disintegration of the Church from within, as dark forces seize power, or as human faith completely vanishes. Some theologians argue that the dreadful judge will judge not only the faithless, but also the faithful, those who haven't lived according to God's teachings, those who've let selfishness and hatred rule their hearts. Picture this: if the day of judgment comes, and you must stand before the judge, what will you say about your life? Have you lived with love, or only for yourself? But Francis's death isn't just a shocking event, it's a reminder of the value of what he left behind. He lived to preach through truth, championing mercy, and bringing hope to the marginalized. His legacy is a more human church, where everyone has a voice, and where mercy takes precedence. He washed the feet of migrants, embraced the poor, and dialogued with other religious leaders to build peace. He taught us that even in the darkest times, we can find light if we choose love and unity. But the question remains, is his legacy strong enough to withstand the coming darkness? Can we, The ones left behind, continue the path he set, or will we be swept into chaos and despair? Imagine this: if we carry on Francis's legacy, could we stop the darkness, or at least ignite a flame strong enough to guide us through the day of judgment? Consider a touching story that emerged after Francis's death, illustrating the power of the legacy he left behind. In a small village in the Philippines, a group of orphaned children held a prayer vigil to honor him. These children had been visited by Francis during a 2015 papal trip, where he hugged each one, promising they'd never be abandoned. One of them, a 12-year-old girl named Anna, said, "He made me feel like I mattered, even though I have no family. I'll live as he taught me to love everyone, no matter who they are." Anna has since become a volunteer in her community, helping other orphan children find hope. She started a small project, collecting books and clothes for poor children, and even organizes storytelling sessions to inspire them about mercy. One child she helped, a boy named Juan, said, "Anna told me Francis taught her to love, and now she's teaching me. I want to grow up and help others like her." Anna's story shows that Francis's legacy didn't die with him, it lives on in the hearts of those he touched, and continues to spread through small acts of love. Here's another example of how Francis's legacy endures. In Brazil, a group of laypeople founded an organization called Mercy in Action, inspired by Francis's teachings on mercy. The group focuses on helping the homeless and immigrants, providing food, shelter, and medical support to those in need. The founder, a woman named Sophia, met Francis during a 2016 papal visit. Sophia recalls that he took her hand and said, "Be a light to those living in darkness, that's our mission." Those words changed her life, and now her organization has helped thousands regain hope and dignity. A homeless man they helped, Carlos, said, "I thought my life was over, but Mercy in Action gave me a home and a new chance. I'm grateful for Francis, even though I never met him." Sophia and Carlos's story shows that Francis's mercy isn't just an ideal, it's a flame that can keep burning, if we choose to keep it alive. Imagine this: if the day of judgment comes, how will you face it, with fear, or with a heart full of love like Francis? Keep watching, because the answer will make you reflect on your own life. Live like Francis, love unconditionally, and be a light in the darkness, for you might be humanity's last hope.